Mass protests against Putin are rising both in Europe and across the country, and the Russian people are trembling with anger. Take a close look at this crowd documented by the Moscow Times. This is the Kursk region, which has seen the most brutal face of the war. At the beginning of the week, about 200 angry civilians surrounded the Sudzhansky district administration building. It wasn't Ukrainian missiles that drove them into the streets. According to reports verified by the Moscow Times and information from the field, what drove them into the streets was the state's suspension of the vital monthly support payments of 65,000 rubles, approximately $650, provided to disaster victims. Residents of the border region report that they cannot even obtain housing permits under the pretext of legal issues. Governor Alexander Khinshtein made a confession that made the situation even worse. The funds were transferred to other projects to give the regional economy a new boost. In other words, the state seized the last penny from its own war victims to cover the budget deficit. More than 150,000 civilians are now both homeless and penniless. Now feeling betrayed, these people were surrounding government buildings with protests. The brutal toll of the Kursk battle was hitting Putin in the face. As the state coffers emptied, patience was running out. And the anger within that crowd was just the beginning. To see this anger and rebellion more clearly, let's briefly visit the Kremlin palace. Look at the atmosphere at the December 8, 2025 meeting of the Strategic Development and National Projects Council. Focus on the calmness on Putin's face and the rosy pictures on the papers. This is a parallel universe completely cut off from the outside world. If you look at what is being discussed at the table, you would think that Russia is not at war, but in the midst of an economic miracle.
Gradually ramping up the dynamic while maintaining moderate inflation that the central bank forecasts.
At this meeting, Putin claims that the Russian economy has grown by 1%, inflation has been kept at 6%, and the country is ready for a long war. Prime Minister Mishustin goes even further, talking about 10% growth despite the sanctions. According to the Kremlin, everything is fine. Russia is standing tall. But now I'm taking you out of that sterile Kremlin hall and bringing you down to the real Russia. This is the economy that Mishustin says has grown by 10%. Look at those hands. They're not fighting to embrace each other, but to grab a carton of eggs. These people aren't buying Putin's statistics. They're trying to survive. If citizens in a country are trampling each other for a basic source of protein, then GDP tables in that country are just a waste of paper. Real inflation isn't 6%. It's probably over 100% on the price tags on supermarket shelves. These images are proof of how Putin's claim of great power has failed in a supermarket aisle. And here is the moment when bureaucracy raised the white flag. Look into the eyes of Samara Governor Fedorishchev. Pay attention to how he chooses his words. He says, "There is growth," but immediately adds, "in a negative direction." And now I'm taking you from here to the heart of Russian trade. Take a good look at this image recently shared on social media by a Russian store owner. The place in the images was once a bustling showroom filled with luxury furniture. But now, the only thing you hear is the business owner's voice, a mix of sadness and anger echoing off the empty walls. It's the story of a bankruptcy, a rebellion. As the governor of Samara confessed, the Great Russia Showcase is completely empty inside, just like this store. By admitting that there is negative growth in every sector, the governor of Samara is actually debunking the fairy tales Putin tells in the Kremlin. Even the governor he appointed himself is now saying the emperor has no clothes. This is the height of irony. Once upon a time, Russian state TV and officials were spreading propaganda that everything was going great. But now, only Putin is doing that on screen. Now, even state television, Putin's most loyal mouthpiece, can no longer sustain this parallel universe. Do you see the fear on the anchors' faces? They're no longer talking about victory, but about the impending disaster. The mainstream media has even started preparing the public for the death spiral the economy is entering. Lying has become impossible even for them. This collapse is not just economic, it's creating a political earthquake. The empty shops you just saw, the scramble for eggs in the markets, the angry protests in the streets, actually symbolize the erosion of support for Putin. Now the Russian people feel betrayed and are abandoning their leader, who has left them to hunger and cold in the streets. Putin's propaganda no longer works, and even state TV and governors are exposing this to the public, blowing up in Putin's face. And the solution to this problem is, of course, the economy. However, contrary to Putin's dreams of growth, as Russian TV and officials have stated, things are not going well there. Putin couldn't solve this internally, nor could he stop the attacks on Ukraine, but he still had one card up his sleeve. The main artery of the Russian economy is selling gas and oil by the shortest route. But those doors are closing one by one. The anger inside has spread to Putin's allies outside. When Ukraine hit the Kazakh CCP at the port of Novorossiysk in November, Putin lost this source of income. This facility accounted for nearly 2% of the global oil economy, and Russia was earning significant revenue from it. The cancellation of this pipeline both cut off a significant source of income for Putin and triggered a serious crisis with Kazakhstan. Another source of income for Putin was Turkey. However, LNG agreements between Turkey and the US in September and Turkey's reduction of Russian gas and oil purchases also narrowed this door. The targeting of Russian ships in Ukrainian ports also drove Turkish and other foreign companies away from the Black Sea. After only 3 tankers in the Black Sea and 1 tanker off the coast of Senegal were damaged, Turkish company Beşiktaş Denizcilik withdrew all 15 of its tankers from Russian routes. Black Sea ports such as Novorossiysk account for about 1/5 of Russia's seaborne crude oil exports, and oil and gas still make up about 1/3 of Russia's federal budget. However, if Putin's tragedy were limited to this decay within his own borders, it might have been seen as a manageable crisis. Now, however, the fire is spreading beyond Moscow and the Black Sea. Putin's dream of a greater Russia is also burning in the capitals of the Kremlin's most trusted allies. Putin's last option, his European allies, have slammed the door on him in a much more explosive manner. The first stop is Slovakia. When Robert Fico came to power, he put all his cards on the table to keep his promise to Moscow. His strategy was to scare the Slovak people with an energy crisis, presenting dependence on Russian gas as a national security issue. Fico constantly told his people the fairy tale that, without Russia, we will freeze. Without Russia, we will die. However, this wall of fear collided with the Slovak people's memory of democracy and crumbled during the week of November 22nd. The spark that ignited the events was Fico's reckless threats against the European Union, and consequently his own allies, which violated diplomatic norms. When Fico stood in front of the cameras and defiantly told Brussels, "You cannot cut off Russian gas. If you do, I will take the EU to court. I will sue you." He did not realize that he was actually declaring war, not on Brussels, but on his own people. This statement was the last straw. The Slovak people saw that their leaders were defending the Kremlin's agenda, not Bratislava's interests. Fico spoke not like the Prime Minister of Slovakia, but like the regional manager of Gazprom, and the response came on November 17th, the anniversary of the Velvet Revolution, like a historic slap in the face. Fico thought he could suppress the protests with police force and repression, but the protesters developed a brilliant, non-violent method that left the regime helpless: the chalk revolution. They had no weapons, no stones, only colored chalk. The streets of Bratislava became a manifesto that the police barricades couldn't stop, one that the entire city read until the rain came. The words written in chalk on the sidewalks cornered Fico. According to Euractiv's report from the field, these actions forced Fico onto the defensive and ended his dominance in the streets. The symbolism of this action is immense. Fico can censor the media, he can silence the television stations, but he cannot remove the sidewalks. By writing "Fico to Moscow," the people showed their prime minister the route he should take. These slogans echoed not only in the capital, but throughout the country. Everywhere Fico's name appeared had now become a billboard demanding his resignation. Although Kremlin media tried to portray these protests as small, marginal groups, international agencies reported the truth to the whole world. The numbers don't lie. According to data verified by AP News, more than 50,000 people gathered in Bratislava on November 17th. This is a huge number for a small country like Slovakia. Proportional to the population, This is a popular uprising. Not only the capital, but also the industrial cities, considered Fico's strongholds, where the working class is concentrated, rebelled. Reuters reported that even in the eastern city of Košice, 20,000 people took to the streets. This data was enough to debunk Fico's lie that the people support me, only the elites in the capital oppose me. 20,000 people in Košice is a political death sentence for Fico. The most chilling moment of the protests was when thousands of people simultaneously took keys out of their pockets, raised them in the air, and jingled them. This gesture has historical significance. In 1989, as the communist regime collapsed in Czechoslovakia, the people did this to tell party leaders, "It's time, take your keys and go home." The fire burning in Slovakia crossed the Danube River and jumped to Putin's real stronghold in Europe, Viktor Orban's Hungary. Orban had been instilling fear in both Brussels and his own people with the image of an untouchable leader he had built up over the years. However, the events of the week of November 22nd showed how fragile this image was. The crisis in Hungary was not limited to street protests, as it was in Slovakia. Triggered by the regime's panic, it turned into a criminal case orchestrated by the state. Faced with the upcoming elections and the unstoppable rise of opposition leader Péter Magyar, the Orban regime lost control. The panicked ruling media illegally obtained and published the names, addresses, and personal data of more than 200,000 opposition supporters. This is an unprecedented surveillance scandal in Hungarian history. This scandal, uncovered by journalist Pannyi Szabolcs, caused an earthquake in Hungarian politics. The aim was to intimidate the public. It was a message saying, "We are watching you, we know who you are." However, this move backfired. Instead of hiding in their homes, people flocked to the rally held in the city of Győr. Péter Magyar defied Orban's empire of fear in front of tens of thousands of people, saying, "We are the majority, and we are not afraid." Orban's panic led to fatal inconsistencies not only in domestic politics, but also in his international rhetoric. For years, the Hungarian Prime Minister had been telling his people the fairy tale that Russia is very powerful, and if we don't get along with them, they will crush us. However, in an interview with Axel Springer CEO Matthias Döpfner, he undermined his own propaganda. "It's absurd for Russia to attack NATO because Russia isn't strong enough. We are much stronger." The result is clear. Not only the Russian people, but also their last friends in Europe are abandoning ship. The people rebelling against the local governor in Kursk, unknown individuals burning down the district building in Košice, soldiers learning that their families have been devastated at the front and reaching the brink of mutiny. All of these are part of an unstructured, chaotic cycle that is accelerating the collapse of the system from within. This is a boomerang thrown by Russia itself, now lodged in its own heart. This destruction began with a strategy to strangle Ukraine's logistical backbone, but ultimately crushed Moscow's own internal backbone as it sought to drag all of Europe into its own chaos. A fight for bread in the streets, a fight for shelter at home, and a lost war at the border. While Putin's Strategic Development Council peddles dreams, the real Russia is igniting the fuse of civil war and mass uprising. So, what are your thoughts on this matter? Please share your thoughts in the comments. As PPR Global, we will continue to pursue the truth. Thank you for choosing us.